Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we're going to be talking about the Civil War. And I'm just realizing I'm wearing all gray like the Confederate Army. Oh, man. This was not planned. Anywho, let's talk about the Civil War. 8th grade history coming at you. All right, so we're almost near the halfway point of this book. So American History, Chapter 14, the Civil War. The Civil War. Okay. All right, so we got a lot of red. We got a lot of red today. Okay. The Secession Crisis. Remember, all the nullification crises kind of culminates with the election of Abraham Lincoln, December 20th, 1860. The South Carolina Convention voted to secede. 6 other slave states followed by March 4th, 1861, and that used to be the inauguration day back then. Remember, I told you, I don't know if I told you this, but back in the day, it wasn't in January. They took over in March. And President Buchanan did little to stop secession in this lame duck period, which is the period between, Lincoln getting elected and between November and March. That's what's known as lame duck period. You have the Crittenden Compromise, which proposed new constitutional amendments guaranteeing slavery where it was and reestablishing the Missouri Compromise line in all U.S. territory where it was in 1860 and the future. So extending that line out, and any land gained in the future or already owned by the United States, if it was underneath that 3630 line, it would become slave controlled. Republicans and the party of Lincoln did not support this plan. And it was also a key part of their platform was the Republican Party's platform was the non-extension of slavery. All right, kind of keeping it where it is, kind of containing it. You have Fort Sumter, which is kind of the kickoff of the Civil War, where Confederate leaders ordered the capture of the fort that is in South Carolina. April 12th, the firing began, and on the 14th, the fort surrendered. It was a siege. I believe one person died. Okay. As Lincoln mobilized for war, remember that means the word means getting ready for the war. 4 more southern states withdrew. However, 4 slave states remained in the Union, and those are called the border states. Make sure you know that what they are. It's Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri. I always find that interesting that Missouri, the one who wanted to enter the Union as a slave state, now sides with the Union. Now, notice that these are the states that they still have slavery. They still have slavery, but they're loyal to the Union. Okay. And at the beginning of the war, Lincoln promised it was to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. All right. Know that. Okay, here's the map of the election of 1860. Remember, we talked about that. The reason why Southern states also seceded was that the South didn't even have a single vote. No Southern state gave an electoral vote to Lincoln, and so they felt that their voice wasn't represented, and so they secede. And so here are the border states right here. Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, and this piece of land, West Virginia. West Virginia become a state in it was like right after the war began or in the middle of the war, and they broke away from Virginia. And so they were the 5th Southern state, border state. All right, so the secession crisis. So the Northern advantages, you might be asked this type of question. What were the advantages between the North and the South? Okay, obviously the North had a larger population, almost twice as much as the South. There was more industry and war production. Again, the differing economies, the differing types of, I don't want to say lifestyle, but basically it was pro manufacturing industry in the North and agricultural agrarian society in the South. We have the advanced transportation system. Again, the railroad boom is going on during this time, and there are more railroads, surprise, surprise, in the North. Southern advantages, they were going to be fighting a defensive war from the get-go, and, kind of like the American Revolution, Southerners are going to know the land much better than the Northerners. Most of their white population was united. They were all about fighting for their rights, fighting for their secession rights, okay? And remember, they also had better military leaders. And that comes with that, the educational opportunities. Even though there are far and few between in the South, they had strong military academies. And both the North and South will mobilize their economies to fight for the war. So mobilization of the North, you have the Homestead Act in 1862, which provided 160 acres of land for settlers to move west for a small fee after 5 years. Okay, the more and more people move out west, the more and more people go to these territories and get it populated. They can apply for statehood and apply to join the Union. You have the Morrill Land Grant, which was federal land given to states to use for financing education. It's going to lead to new colleges and universities, such as the prestigious Cornell University. Tariffs are going to be raised to its highest level in history to that point. Republicans dominated Congress, and so they wanted to raise tariff rates. Republicans always want to raise tariff rates. That's how you can figure it out. Raise Republic. Railroad subsidies were given for the Transcontinental Railroad, and the Union Pacific and Central Pacific met in Promontory, Utah. I don't know if I'm saying that city right. So they construct the western half. The Union Pacific constructs the western half, and starting, I think, from Independence, Missouri, somewhere around there, they connect the Central Pacific and Union Pacific, and they met in 1869. And you also have national bank acts where banks could join and issue treasury notes, so-called greenbacks. And how did the country finance the war? Well, lots of borrowing, lots of taxes, borrowing in the form of bonds. Pay the government this amount of money, you'll receive it with interest after a set amount of years. That is a bond. And we'll see that being used later on in future wars. So here's the Union Pacific and Central Pacific meeting in Utah. Mobilization of the war continues. Conscription, know that word, it means a military draft. However, wealthy individuals could hire substitutes for $300, basically paying your way out of the war, buying yourself freedom from fighting. The Civil War was seen as a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. Again, the rich, if they had the money, they didn't have to fight. They could pay for a substitute to fight for them. So that's going to lead to some New York City draft riots. And over a 4-day span of rioting, over 100 people will die. And the executive power of the presidency was gained during the war. Lincoln sent troops into battle and increased military size without congressional approval. He also suspended habeas corpus, where you can only be put on trial. And he shut down newspapers in Maryland that were, getting a little propaganda-y, anti-war. In the election of 1864, it was versus Lincoln and the former Union general, which Lincoln dismissed, George McClellan. Lincoln won the electoral vote, but there was an actual close popular vote. But you know which one counts. Electoral College. Here's a picture of the New York City draft riots, and here is the father of future American President Teddy Roosevelt. He was one of those those wealthy, rich people to buy their way out of the war. And that is only going to make Teddy more for the war. The mobilization of the North, early emancipation of the Confiscation Act of 1861, where slaves used in the Southern military effort would be considered free. In 1862, there was a law that abolished slavery in D.C. And you also have another Confiscation Act of 1862, where the president could use freed slaves as soldiers. Again, it kind of comes down to that at the beginning of the war, where beginning of this lecture, we talked about the Union advantages and the South advantages, where in the South, almost all the white people were for the war. Couldn't really say that much about the North, and that's kind of why. I mean, people are going to be for, going to war and all that, but, there's a lot more people in the North than the South, so there's a lot more, anti-war people. Not as much, but they're still there. So you gotta use all the soldiers, all the men, all the manpower you can find. And that's going to lead to the Emancipation Proclamation, which is the executive order to free all slaves in areas of the Confederacy that were in rebellion. Keyword, in rebellion. So it doesn't get rid of slavery in the border states. Okay, it frees all slaves in the Confederacy that are in rebellion. Okay, keyword, again, did not include areas under Union control nor the border states. This will change the war effort to eventually end slavery, in addition to preserving the Union. And this will also help keep the Europeans from siding on behalf of the South, because these countries, France, Britain, Spain, do a lot of business with the Southern economies, but they're also pro-abolitionist countries. And if the South ain't going to get rid of it, they ain't going to do business. Here's Lincoln. I believe this is his, he's about to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Yeah. Okay. African Americans during the war, escaped slaves were considered contraband and would not be returned back to the South. And Black enlistment is going to increase post-Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, who wouldn't want to go fight against these bigoted, racist slave owners and these pro-slave people in the South? You have the 54th Infantry, which was made up of all Black soldiers that fought for the North, that is represented in the movie Glory. But unfortunately, Black soldiers would be paid less, and they're often going to be doing the arduous manual labor, like setting up camps, cleaning out stuff. So there's still a tendency of racism in the Union Army. Women during the war, most women entered nursing. Obviously, they couldn't fight. You have also the National Women's Loyal League, 1863. It was founded by our girls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, which they hoped to eliminate slavery and gain women's suffrage. Again, a key part of, the early suffrage movement for women is that it occurred simultaneously when abolition was going on, and for the white males of the society back then, ending slavery or fighting to end slavery was more important than giving women the right to vote. Here's a picture of the 54th Infantry. And here's some slaves being captured as contraband that would be used to fight for the North. Those runaway slaves that were newly freed. Mobilization of the South, they are called the Confederate States of America. CSA, the most power resided in the states. They did have a president, Jefferson Davis, and vice president, Alexander Stephens. Confederate economics, no uniform currency system, and that's going to lead to super high inflation, around 9,000% during the war. Crazy high. The Confederate government authorized the impressment of slaves and a food draft. Again, because of these economic policies, there's not going to be enough food. And then they're just going to force slaves to fight for them. And the role of women, Southern women, changed drastically. Women were put in charge of farming as the husbands left the farms to go fight. And widowed women had to find jobs to support themselves and their families. Here's a picture of Alexander Stephens. Strategy and diplomacy, again, kind of more North-South advantages. The South, of course, had the better military leadership than the North. And this is around the time Ulysses S. Grant won't become leader general of the Union Army until March 1864, as Lincoln was struggling to find better leaders because the South was winning for a time. However, the Northern Navy was vastly superior to the Southern Navy. The North blockaded the South in what's called the Anaconda Plan. And the Navy will aid in transportation supplies of troops all across the South. Also to mention, transportation via railroad as well. So here you have something called the Anaconda Plan. An anaconda constricts their prey, and that's the point of the South or of the North, to constrict the South, blockading any routes out that they could possibly make trade and gain new supplies and bring in food, all of that. And they're going to start basically kind of up the Mississippi, but also into Texas, and here in the Caribbean and along the East Coast. Okay. And when you constrict them and you limit them and you blockade stuff from getting through, it's going to hurt the South. And this is created by General Winfield Scott. All right, so the course of battle, again, the AP test, not really going to talk about battle here, battle there, battle everywhere. They're going to look for the significances of battles and what it led to, but they're not going to talk about, this strategy was utilized, and then this, and then that, and it's not going to be like that. Okay, over 600,000 Americans, North and South, died in the war. The key battles, Antietam, which is the bloodiest one-day battle of the war. It's going to lead Lincoln to make the Emancipation Proclamation. You're going to also have the Battle of Gettysburg between July 1st and 3rd of 1863, which will lead to the Gettysburg Address, which was issued November 19th, 1863. And the battlefield was dedicated as a cemetery. And in his speech, he referenced the Declaration of Independence 407 years ago. A score means 20 years. So 427 years ago, 87. Here's a famous quote. "We were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have the new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth." Another key event that happened towards the end of the Civil War was General William Tecumseh Sherman's marched to the sea, where he started basically from Tennessee, and made his way eastward towards Atlanta. And Atlanta at the time was a big Confederate transportation hub. And he's just destroying land and supplies of the South in about, I think it was a 5-mile radius of just burning everything in its path all the way to the sea. And he would work his way up the Atlantic coast. He wasn't afraid to, attack civilians, let alone soldiers, let alone the spoils of war comes with pillaging towns and women. He's also known for saying war is hell. And the final battle, the Appomattox Courthouse, where General Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant on that day in 1865, April 9th, 1865. And that ended the Civil War. So here's Lincoln about to give his Gettysburg Address. And that's it. Okay, so that concludes this chapter about the Civil War. And hey, it might have been a refresher. You might have already known this from 8th grade, but it's pretty big in regards to U.S. history. And even though we're in, period 5, which is halfway through all the periods that you need to know for the test, it's still big. The College Board thinks this is as big as ever to our history. We're fighting against each other. So there you go. Hopefully you liked that. If you did, smash that like button. And as always, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.